Good day, everyone. We are the presenter in Chapter 11, the Communication in Organization. So, the chapter outlined the nature of communication in organizations, methods of communication, the communication process, digital information processing and telecommunication, communication networks, managing communication. And the next is the objectives. After studying this chapter, you should be able to discuss the nature of communication in organization, identify and describe the primary methods of communication, describe the communication process, note how information technology affect communication, identify and discuss the basic kinds of communication networks, discuss how communication can be managed in an organization. So communication. What is communication? Communication is a social process in which two or more parties exchange information and share meaning. So, communication is a way for us to understand each other. It is one of the most important elements of understanding in a society. Here, we can express our thoughts about what we see and feel. A society that lack of communication is often chaotic and misunderstood. Next is the purpose of organizational communication. So the primary purpose is to achieve coordinated action. The second purpose of communication is information sharing. Communication expresses feelings and emotion. So achieving coordinated action is the prime purpose of communication in organization. Sharing information properly and expressing emotions help achieve coordinated action. So the next is the communication across cultures. Communication is an element of interpersonal relation that obviously is affected by the international environment, partly because of language issues and partly because of coordination issues. So first, let's start sa language. Language. Differences in language are compounded by the fact that the same word can mean different things in different cultures. So for example, hello. In Japan, it's konnichiwa. In Korea, annyeonghaseyo. Oh yeah. Next is elements of nonverbal communication is also vary across cultures. Colors and body language can convey quite a different message from one culture to another. So these are the example. In US, the okay. In US, it's okay. In Japan, it's meaning it's money. In France, you're a big zero. In Brazil, an insult like in Middle East, middle finger in the US. So coordination. International communication is closely related to issues of coordination. So for example, our family Harris has its own satellite-based and telephone network to monitor and participate in the worldwide money and financial markets. And of course, the internet makes it easier than ever to communicate across different parts of the world. So that's all my report. And the next reporter is Miss Rachel May Mauro.
So, good day everyone. I am Rachel May Mauro. I am tasked to report about methods of communication. So, there are primarily methods of communicating in organization. So, these are written communication, oral communication, and the nonverbal communication. So, what is written communication? So, written communication refers to the process of conveying a message through the written signs or symbols. So, here are the examples of written communications. Letter. So, letter is a formal means of communicating with an individual, generally someone outside in the organization. So, I think email is probably the most common form of written communication in organizations today. Memo also is still very common up until now. And other forms of common communications are reports, manuals, and forms. So next is oral communication. So oral communication is a communicating with spoken words. It is a verbal form of communication where you communicate your thoughts, present ideas, and share information. So the most prevalent form of organizational communication is oral. So oral communication takes place everywhere. In informal conversations, in the process of doing work, in meetings of groups and task forces, and informal speeches, and also presentation. So some studies have suggested that oral communication skills may be the number one criterion for hiring a new college graduate. So oral forms of communications are particularly powerful because they include not only speakers' words but also their changes in tone, pitch, speed, and volume, and may be accompanied by facial expressions and gesture. So, examples of oral communications is informal conversations like formal speeches and group discussion. So next is nonverbal communication. So, nonverbal communication is the transfer of information through the use of body language, including eye contact, facial expressions, and gestures, and more. So, nonverbal communication includes all the elements associated with human communications that are not expressed orally or in writing. Sometimes nonverbal communication conveys more meaning than words. So, example, like for example, this man. So, nonverbal communication can convey a great deal of information. So, this man has just read some bad financial news and he's venting his anger and frustration by tearing this paper in half. His facial expressions also makes his feelings clear. So, also body language examples of nonverbal communication. So, that's the end of my report. Thank you and keep safe, everyone.
So now we will discuss the communication process. So what communication process means? So communication is a social process in which two or more parties exchange information and share meaning. The process is social because it involves two or more people. So it means that it is a two-way process and takes place over time rather than instantaneously. And in each element of the basic communication process is important. If one part is faulty, the messages may not be communicated as it was intended. A simple organizational example might be when a manager attempts to give direction to an employee regarding the order in which to perform two tasks. Each part of the communication process describes next. So next is the source. The source is an individual, group, or organization interested in communicating something to another party. In group or organizational communication, an individual may send the message on behalf of the organization. So that is the example of a source. It is the so-called communication process. So next is encoding. Encoding is the process by which the message is translated from an idea or thought into symbols that can be transmitted. In a simple example, the manager may use words in English as the symbols, usually spoken or written. Next is the transmission. Transmission is the process through which the symbols that carry the messages are sent to the receiver. The medium is the channel or path of the transmission.
To tell the employee in what order to perform tasks, the manager could tell the employee face-to-face or use the telephone, a memo, email, or voicemail. Communications media range from interpersonal media, such as talking or touching, to mass media such as newspapers, magazines, or television's broadcasts. Different media have different capacities for carrying information. Next is decoding. Decoding is the process by which the receiver of the message interprets its meaning. It means that the receiver attached to the symbols may be the same as or different from the meaning intended by the source. If the meanings differ, of course, communication breaks down and misunderstanding is likely. The receiver of the message may be an individual, a group, an organization, or individual acting as the representative of a group. The receiver decides whether to decode the message, whether to make an effort to understand it, and whether to respond. The key skill for proper reception of the message is good listening, and the expressions of emotions by the sender and receiver enters into the communication process at several points. The feedback may be as simple as a phone call from the prospective client expressing interest in the business proposal, or as complex as a written brief on a complicated point of law sent from an attorney to a judge. And that means it is the feedback. And it is also the receiver's response to the message. Feedback verifies the message by telling the source whether the receiver received and understood the message. Next is noise. Noise is any disturbance in the communication process that interferes or distorts communication. So it is the barrier of the communication, which is the noise. It is also the principal type called channel noise. It is associated with a medium. Effective communication occurs when information or meaning has been shared by at least two people. The evolution of new technology in recent years presents novel problems in ensuring that communication works as sender and receiver expect them to. So now we will discuss about the digital information processing and telecommunication. Many recent innovations are based on new technologies, computerized information processing systems, telecommunicating systems, the internet, organizational intranets and extranets, and various communications of these technologies. Many employees telecommunicate from home rather than going to the office every day, and whole new industries are developing around information storage, transmission, and many more. Computers are facilitating the increase in telecommunicating across the US or the United States and reducing number of trips people make to the office to get work done. The real increases in organizational productivity due to information technology may come from the ability to communicate in new and different ways rather than from simply speeding up existing communication patterns. One of these new ways of communicating is idea sharing or knowledge sharing by sharing information on what practices works best. Digital technology is therefore speeding up existing communication and developing new types of organizational communication process with potential new benefits and problems for managers. And that ends on my report. The next report would be Arfa Miharis. Thank you so much.
So now we are going to tackle about communication networks. So what is communication networks? It is a forms spontaneously and naturally is an interaction among workers continue over time. A communication network refers to how information flows within the organization. Information within an organization generally flows through a system rather than being a free flow. Communication networks are regularly patterns of person-to-person relationships through which information flows in an organization. So, by the way, in communication network, there are two networks: the small group networks and organizational communication networks. So, in small group networks, it is to examine interpersonal communications in a small group. We can observe that the patterns that emerge as the work of the group proceeds and information flows from some people in the group of others. So in small group networks, there are four types of communication networks that are most common in organizations, and these lines um, frequently used communication links in small group. So first is the wheel network. So in a wheel network, information flows between the person at the end of each spoke and the person in the middle, meaning it is a style of communication where the leader is the only one to receive or give information or to communicate within his or her group. So next is the chain network. And each member communicates with the person above and below, except individuals on each end who communicate with only person. The communication starts at the top of the chain, has to go through each individual link before getting to the end. So third is the circle network. So each member communicates with the people or either side, but with no one else. It is found in task forces and committees. Employees communicate only with adjoining members of the organization. So next is the all-channel network. All members communicate with all other members, meaning it is found in informal groups with no formal structure, no formal leader or task to accomplish, where all groups members participated and no one takes a leadership role. So next, we're going to tackle about organizational communication network. This is to diverge from reporting relationships as employees seek better information with which to do their job. So employees find it the easiest way to get their job done or to obtain necessary informations to go directly to employees in other departments rather than through the formal way of communicating information. So roles that people play in an organizational network can be analyzed in terms of the contribution to the functioning of the network. So first is the gatekeeper, has a strategic position in the network that allows him or her to control information moving in either direction through a channel. So two is the liaison, serves as a bridge between groups, tying groups together and facilitating the communication from needed to integrate group activities. So third is the cosmopolitan, links the information, links the organization to the external environment and may also be an opinion leader in the group. So fourth is the isolate and the isolated dyad, tend to work alone and to interact and communicate little with others. So next is the example of the organizational communication networks between the organization chart. So as you can see that the difference between the two. So by the way, in these four roles and functions of it is each of these roles and functions plays an important part in the overall functioning of the communication network and the organizations of the communications. I mean, in the communication. So, the primary function of organizational structure is to coordinate coordinate the activities of many people during specialized tasks. So the flow of information is to manage, then regulated and structured. So that would be all. Thank you.
Hi everyone, so now we will tackle about managing communication. This time we will discuss about improving the communication process and improving organizational factors in communication. So first we will define what is communication management. So it is the systematic planning, implementing, monitoring, and revision of all the channels of communication within an organization and between organizations. It also includes the organization and dissemination of new communication directives connected with an organization, network, etc. So, communication also is a vital management component to any organization.
Thank you.
So, communication fidelity. It is a degree of correspondence between the message intended by the source and the message understood by the receiver. So, to improve organizational communication, one must understand potential problems using the basic communication process. We can identify several ways to overcome typical problems. The source. It is the sender of the message. In other words, you, and the message refers to the information and ideas that you want to deliver. You need to be clear about what message you want to communicate and why it's important, what its main purpose. Source also is one of the basic concepts of communication and information processing. Sources are objects which encode message, data, and transmit the information via a channel to one more of servers. Next is encoding and decoding. Problems occur as the message is translated into or translated from the symbol used in transmission. Such problems can relate to the meaning of the symbol or to the transmission itself. Encoding and decoding problems include lack of common experience between source and receiver, problems related to semantics as the use of jargon and difficulties with the medium. So, encoding means the one who communicate with other people and to transmit any messages. While decoding it is the one who receive the message and it is also the audience. Next is we will define what is semantics. It is the study of language forms and jargon. It is the specialized or technical language of a trade, profession, or social group. The example of jargon is in military group, the word that is commonly used of them is awol. It means the absence of that person without leave or permission. Next is receiver. Several communication problems originate in the receiver, including problems with selective attention, value judgments, source credibility, and overload. Selective attention exists when the receiver attends only to selected parts of a message. A frequent occurrence with oral communication. So, the receiver is the person who receives any messages from the sender. Next is feedback. The purpose of feedback is verification, in which the receiver sends a message to the source indicating receipt of the message and the degree to which it was understood. Lack of feedback can cause at least two problems. The first is the source may need to send another message that depends on the response to the receiver. And if the source receives no feedback, the source may not send the second messages or may be forced to send the original message again. Second, the receiver may act on the unverified message. If the receiver misunderstood the message, the resulting act may be inappropriate. So, feedback is the person who responds the message of the sender. Next is verification. It is the feedback portion of communication in which the receiver sends a message to the source indicating receipt of the message and the degree to which he or she understood the message. Next is we will tackle about improving organizational factors and communication. So first, what is organizational factors that can create communication? It is breakdowns or barriers include noise, status differences, time pressures, and overload. As previously stated, disturbances anywhere in the organization can distort or interrupt meaningful communication. Reduce noise. Noise is a primary barrier to effective organizational communication. A common form of noise is the rumor grapevine, as informal system of communication that coexists with the formal system. The grapevine is an informal system of communication that coexists with a formal system. So when we say about reduce noise, when we translate a message or when we communicate with other people, we must make sure that the noise is reduced or low so that you can understand each other. Next is foster informal communication. Communication in well-run companies was once described as a vast network and formal, open communications. 22 informal communication fosters mutual trust, which minimizes the effects of status differences. Next is develop a balanced information network. Many large organizations have developed elaborate formal information networks to cope with the potential problems of information overload and time pressures. So, network also can help us to communicate with other people which is far away from us. So that would be all our report. Thank you for listening and have a good and nice day. By the way, I am Julina Munding, the last reporter. Last ko, diba?